Hello, and welcome to this installment of Vox Machina. As your narrator, I'll be bringing fantastic works of fiction from the page to your eardrums. Uploads will be posted weekly, so be sure to subscribe and hit the alerts bell to be notified when new installments are available. Got a story you think deserves the Vox Machina treatment? Let me know in a comment, and you might just hear it in a future episode. Thanks for listening, and on with the show. In Bad Faith by Fencer X. Episode 7. The remainder of the 30 days of house arrest imposed by the consummation clause did not pass by quickly, but they certainly didn't drag half as badly as the first 2 weeks had. Draco was in staggeringly lighter spirits now that he'd beaten the curse, and the improvement in his mood consequently had Harry feeling more focused as well. Harry was now in the "sorry, I've come down with a nasty case of spattergroit, so I'll be working remotely until that's cleared up" stage of his extended holiday from work, and was receiving assignments by owl daily. It was tedious, busy work, so now that he wasn't feeling like the human version of nails on a chalkboard, Harry decided rather than stay cooped up in his room in the East Wing all day, he would spend some time in other areas of the manor, mostly the bits he didn't associate with pain and torture and death. The sunroom was lovely, though it could get toasty now that summer was bearing down upon them. The tea room was nice as well, if a bit too much on the fancy side of things for Harry to feel comfortable just putting his feet up and settling in to copy reports. The parlor was his favourite room, if only for the occasional flu calls he got from Hermione checking to see they hadn't killed one another and left the peacocks to reclaim their hold over the manor. Granted, she asked more intimate questions than Harry was quite comfortable answering, mostly about the influx and how it was affecting their physical relationship. "We haven't got one." "I only meant have you felt compelled to be more tactile." "I don't know what that word even means, but I'm pretty sure the answer's a resounding no." But he still appreciated the outside human contact. All in all, things were actually going pretty smoothly. Draco did whatever it was he did most of the day. Harry didn't think it was more research, since there'd probably be more paperweights thrown at walls if so, and generally kept to the West Wing while Harry had the run of the rest of the manor. Old Burns served them meals in their rooms, and there were no more fits or transformations or anything out of sorts. Every day a few more imps crawled out of the note pit and started making mischief, and it was in rare moments like this that Harry and Draco put their wands together to dispatch them before things got too out of hand. That blood boon was no joke. But otherwise they stayed out of each other's way. Which, Harry decided, was kind of silly. After all, they'd managed quite well, leaning on each other in a rather vulnerable state. Perhaps that had been a sign they'd matured enough they could actually be civil with one another without a threat to one or the other's life hanging over their heads, forcing them to play nice. And so, damning any unspoken rules about where it was and was not appropriate to congregate, Harry decided that instead of poring over expense reports and invoices for the ministry's janitorial services in his room, as he usually did, he would do so in the parlor. The parlor, it turned out, was also Draco's favorite room, and it was not difficult to see why. Nothing bad had happened here, at least that Harry could recall from his brief stint in the manor during the war and the snatches of memory he'd siphoned from Voldemort's mind, and unlike most of the other rooms in the manor, the parlor was furnished for comfort rather than fashion, the sofa deep and inviting and the chairs plushly upholstered. Draco often laid claim to it himself in the evenings after Old Burn had served their dinner, venturing forth from the West Wing only after sundown like an actual ghost in his own home. He would sprawl out on the couch, putting his feet up and read, ostensibly for pleasure this time, rather than hunched over the desk in his study as he'd done when doing research. Harry had watched from afar until this point, catching glimpses on his way to and from the bathroom, but that all changed tonight. On this particular evening, he found Draco in his usual position, laid out long and lanky, taking up nearly the entire length of the sofa, and deeply engrossed in what looked to be a book on either dragon husbandry or dragon husbands. Seeing as the couch was more than long enough to comfortably sate the both of them, if some people didn't insist on taking up the whole thing, Harry gathered up his papers and quill, made his way to the parlor, and parked himself right on top of Draco's toes. It was only Draco quickly drawing himself into a fetal position that saved his toes from being stuck under Harry's arse for the remainder of the evening. Harry made a show of making himself comfortable, summoning an inkwell to settle on the little table nearest his end of the couch, and pointedly organizing and reorganizing his papers, muttering to himself all the while. Annoying Draco was, Harry had learned, the quickest way to start a conversation, and he was very bored and very much in want of a good tete-a-tete this evening. Draco quietly seethed, Harry could very much feel it, for a good 10 minutes, and then he began to not quietly seethe. "You know," he said, one leg thrown over the other. He wasn't wearing any socks, which seemed very plebeian for someone so priggish. The manor has 7 bedrooms, 3 libraries, 2 studies, a master office, a sunroom, a tea room, and reading nooks at the end of either wing. Sounds like overkill to me. Any chance you could kindly fuck off to one of those other locales and leave me to read in peace? I'm leaving you to read in peace right here. Stop talking and it'll be a lot more peaceful. Draco said something softly under his breath that Harry couldn't catch, but figured was probably a swear. He then kicked at Harry a few times, trying to stretch out his ridiculously long legs, and only seemed satisfied once he'd shoved his toes in between Harry's spine and the back cushions of the couch. Harry blithely tolerated the intrusion into his personal space, and for another 10 minutes Draco did too, before slamming his book shut with a huff, leaping to his feet and moving to one of the great chairs. He summoned a little ottoman over to support his legs, cracked open his book that was probably about dragon diddling, and settled in once more to attempt to focus. Harry could feel that focus stretched paper thin, though, and it was starting to worry at his own concentration. Much more of this tension, and they'd find themselves stuck in a spiral, dragging each other down until one or the other popped off and tempers flared brighter than they already were. Harry was once again going to have to be the bigger man. He set aside his papers very deliberately, and though Draco did not look up or say anything, Harry could still see his grip on the bookbinding tense, knuckles going white. Harry took a breath to try and calm himself, hoping the influx might unruffle Draco's now metaphorical feathers, but had no idea if it worked. You really don't want to share space with me that badly? Really, I don't. Harry wanted to immediately retort, could have fooled me the other night, but a tiny little niggling voice inside of him said that would be very dangerous ammunition to play with. Instead, he said, and what is it about me that's so very horrible? Let me count the ways. Harry held out his arms in invitation. Okay, go on. Count the ways. Draco sighed and slammed his book shut. For one, I don't like you. I make a point of not spending time in close quarters with people I don't like. That doesn't do anything to answer the question of why, though. I mean, me, I've got about 50 reasons not to like you, but I honestly struggle to come up with more than, 3 for you not to like me. He threw his head back, staring up at the slowly rotating chandelier hanging from the tall ceiling above. I just don't see why for 2 weeks we can't pretend we at least tolerate each other, maybe talk some. Because I'm going to go absolutely spare if I have to spend another night copy-editing the head Aura's birthday remarks for the junior assistant to the Minister for Magic. Draco shifted forward, gaze narrowed in incredulity. So all this is because you're bored? Well, a little bit, yeah. There's a dozen other things we could be doing with our free evenings besides sitting holed up in our rooms. We could listen to Quidditch on the wireless, or even play Quidditch. You've got a gargantuan ballroom at the end of the East Wing, did you know? Or play wizard's chess, or exploding snap, or gobstones, or anything. I swear I had more fun stuffed into a cupboard under the stairs for the first 11 years of my life. Oh, my apologies, I haven't made your house arrest as thrilling an experience as I'm sure you were expecting. Oh, come off it. I wasn't expecting anything. I'm saying we're both stuck here, and maybe we could pretend we don't despise each other for just a few more days to stave off the boredom. Who's bored? It sounds to me like it's just you. Draco waved his book for show. I'm catching up on my reading. Why are you so... Harry swallowed down a grunt of frustration. I'm trying to be fucking civil with you. To maybe be something approaching friendly, and you insist on... Except we aren't friends. We are not friends, Draco said, punctuating each word with deliberation. We aren't chums, we aren't pals, we aren't best mates, we aren't anything. Harry opened his mouth to point out one thing they very much were now, but Draco cut him off. And if you fucking call us husbands, I'll hex your lips to the back of your head. Draco squared his jaw, and Harry could feel a sort of nervous energy arcing between them, though it was difficult to tell if it was the influx or just raw arcane power about to explode the both of them into bits. We are in this arrangement purely because you have forced me into it, and once it's no longer a matter of necessity, I intend to move on as if it never happened, preferably very, very far away from you. I reached out to you in a moment of shameful weakness, and every time I look at you now, that is all I can think about. So you'll pardon me if I don't want to see your face any more than I absolutely have to. Harry frowned, less offended by the cutting remarks than the idea that his very presence caused Draco pain. Harry knew he could be a jerk sometimes, but he liked to think he wasn't needlessly cruel. I didn't mean to. Of course you didn't, Draco sighed, leaning back and massaging his temples. And I'm sure you thought you were doing me a grand favor. offering a shoulder to lean on, an unjudging embrace, a gentle pat on the back to instill in me a fraction of the courage you had burning in your veins. Why? Harry protested, standing up. That wasn't why I did it at all. He shook his head. Do you just while away your afternoons up there in your study, concocting ridiculous excuses for why I act the way I do? If so, be a lad and share them with me. I could use a good laugh. Hell, I don't even know why I do half the stuff I do. Just because you're unable to understand your own motives doesn't mean the rest of us are so lacking. Well, I think I'd know for sure if I were doing you a favor. If you'll recall, I was keeping track of them. And then Draco was on his feet as well. I don't care what you think you were doing. Honestly, I don't. I don't give two shits about your motivations. I try to think about you as little as possible in a given day. But you're, for some reason, insistent on making that very difficult. All I want is for you to stop pretending like this is anything but a stopgap to your next charity project. His next charity project. A favor. A matter of necessity. Draco couldn't wrap his mind around the idea that Harry might actually enjoy being around him. Not that Harry did enjoy being around him. Draco just couldn't fathom the existence of any reality where Harry might. And anything that remotely resembled such a reality evidently scared the shit out of him. Why did you try to be my friend back in first year? Draco looked at him like he'd grown a second head. The subject shift had probably given him whiplash. Why did I... What? In first year, you tried to make friends with me. In your own way. You were terrible at it, and you haven't gotten any better in the time since, but you did make the first move, forever and a day ago. Why? Draco scoffed, as if this were a very silly question. You're you. I assumed at the time your celebrity meant status. Blessedly, you rejected my advances, so I never paid the price for how very poorly I judged your usefulness. You didn't know who I was, though. What? The first time we met, you didn't know who I was. Draco was now looking at him like he'd grown a third head. You were there at Madame Malkin's when I went to get fitted for my school robes. You were making conversation, and I was a total stranger. I know for a fact I didn't look like much, certainly no one the likes of you would find worth hobnobbing with. So why'd you chat me up, if I wasn't going to be of any use to you? Draco frowned, and Harry could see him searching his mind for this memory and failing to find it. Harry wasn't sure why he remembered it so vividly himself, but there it was. Probably because so much of that day was burned into his mind, the day he'd realized there was ever so much more to the world around him, and it was worth hanging in there to see and explore it all. I'm sure I've got no idea. Now who's having trouble understanding their own motives? It's all right. Maybe it's easier for everyone to pick apart how someone else thinks and acts than to self-reflect. 'Cause see, I think I know why. Draco's lip curled, and he crossed his arms. Oh, pray tell. I think you wanted a friend. I recognize that sounds a bit circular. Of course you tried to be my friend because you wanted a friend, but it's not quite that. You didn't look at me and think, oh, here's someone who'll help me get ahead, or here's a fellow who's going places, or even humiliating this one will make me look important to others. I was a nobody to you, and yet you went out of your way to try and impress me, to try and make me look up to you, to like you, to want to hang around you more and hear all about the amazing things you'd accomplished in your 11 whole years upon this earth. Draco's cheeks were darkening with shame, and Harry could feel it welling up inside him as well. Draco was at his most dangerous when he thought someone was getting too close to seeing the real him, and Harry had to tread very carefully, he knew. He stepped closer, knowing he was well within paperweight chucking distance. You wanted this random kid who'd wandered in off the street to like you, and funnily enough, I was ready to, because I didn't have any friends back then. I had Hagrid, and I think you and I can agree he doesn't count, but you were... He shook his head. It was a weird day for me. And you were one of the best parts of it. Now, full disclosure, you got on my nerves pretty quick, but I was still absolutely fascinated by you. I mean, you were a wizard. The first real one I'd ever spoken to, my age at least. You flew on broomsticks and you knew what house you wanted to be in. You had a mother and a father who were magic too. He laughed a bit self-deprecatingly. I felt so stupid talking to you. Like I didn't have a single interesting thought in my head. You were snotty and priggish, and I knew in my gut we wouldn't get along, but I still wanted to. I wanted to be your friend, before Hermione or Ron or Neville or Luna or anyone else. Draco's nostrils flared a bit, and Harry thought he could hear his heart pounding in his chest. Or maybe it was just Harry's own. And what the fuck is this little jaunt down memory lane supposed to mean? It means that this isn't a charity project or a favor or anything else you might dream it to be. Maybe I don't really know why I'm doing it either, but I remember standing in the lobby of Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions and seeing you and thinking I wanted nothing more than for you to tell me everything there was to know, and maybe even a few things I shouldn't know. For better or worse, you were one of the very first people who taught me about being a wizard. You helped make me who I am. And once upon a time, you wanted to be my friend. Genuinely, without wanting anything from me in return, but for someone to think you were amazing. And for a brief few moments, 11-year-old me did think that. Then I realized you were an asshole, but you were still an amazing one. And maybe part of me still thinks that a little bit. Draco blinked at him slowly. I genuinely do not know what the fuck that was about. Yeah, I think the threat of it may have gotten away from me there. Harry scratched the back of his neck, wrinkling his nose in irritation with himself. His lack of eloquence had never pained him more than in this moment. Anyway, the point I'm getting at is that I'm here with you because I want to be. Full stop. And I'm down here, sitting in the parlor with you, also because I want to be. And once upon a time, you would have wanted me to be here too. So I'm just wondering why we can't go back to then. And maybe try to not piss each other off this time. See what happens. You won't insult my new best friend, and I won't call you the wrong sort, and we'll go from there. You can stand on top of that ottoman and tell me all about your family home and how loaded you are, and I think there was a story about nearly running into a helicopter in there at some point. We'll see how far we get. I don't know how things work in House Gryffindor, but in Slytherin we weren't exactly the cuddle on the couch types, friends or otherwise. Since we're decidedly otherwise, I'm going to reiterate that this is a very spacious manor and ask you to avail yourself of any of the numerous other spaces. If it's a gaming opponent you're after, Old Burn's a deft hand at a fair few such distractions and could put up more than a fair fight, I'm sure. Harry made a face. Well, I wasn't asking to cuddle. I was just, I was mostly... He wrinkled his nose, feeling quite childish. Mostly was just trying to annoy you, get a rise out of you. Unlucky day, it worked! Well, right, fine, that's on me. You need your personal space, I can understand that, but we can still be civil around each other and have conversations that don't involve strings of insults. I'll take all the space you can give me. You in the East Wing and me in the West suits me just fine. Maybe you want to rehash the greatest hits of 1991, but I'm good, thanks. I'm not going to curl up on the couch with you in front of the fire in companionable silence, or share a laugh over a drink about some kooky coworker you had to deal with today and pretend like this is... He seemed to run out of steam, his own train of thought perhaps having jumped the tracks, and he broke into frantic, nervous pacing. Harry wasn't the most insightful of blokes, but he was beginning to get the sense that this wasn't just about invading Draco's personal space. And then Draco stopped, running a hand through his hair. Strands were working themselves free from the long plait draped over his shoulder, and he looked decidedly frazzled. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Harry didn't know what it, or like this, was, so he let Draco tell him. I wanted to be like my parents when I grew up. Why was Harry not surprised? Perhaps Draco could see the internal rolling of his eyes, for he continued defensively, and save your smart remarks. However horrible you think my family is, my parents did love each other. They married with affection and mutual respect. They were each other's favourite person. And when I had fantasies as a child, it wasn't about being Minister for Magic or swimming in galleons. It was just... He turned to frown at the sofa behind them. This couch, with my parents sat upon it in quiet companionship, while I read my picture books by the light of the fire grate. He turned back to Harry. And even when I grew up, I still wanted to go back to those moments. Relive them. His expression twisted, and Harry felt regret and frustration burn in his own chest. I don't want to be your friend. I don't want to be someone my spouse barely tolerates, someone they share space with for only as long as absolutely necessary. I don't want this. I want to be someone's favourite person too. someone they're proud of and care about and want to protect, not because I need them to come to my rescue, but because they just like me very much and want me to be happy. He dropped down onto the couch, bent over at the waist and head in his hands. I'm supposed to be the lord of the fucking manor, and now I'm just trying to outrun some ridiculous bit of bog magic stuck with you. I wasted a marriage on you to save my own skin. He rubbed his arms as if for warmth, staring into the cold, dark fire grate. It wasn't supposed to be like this. So it all came back around to the wedding, to a ritual Harry had generously taken part in to spare Draco from the fate worse than death that would have been the hag's curse. But, of course, Draco didn't see it that way. Perhaps it was a pure-blood thing. Maybe they didn't generally get annulments or divorces. God, what if he didn't want to get one at all, simply because it wasn't done? No, that was an issue to be argued about, and argued about, and argued about, far in the future. Harry would worry about that when it came. For now, it seemed the more pressing matter was reminding Draco that there was indeed a relationship to be had between barely tolerating someone and wanting to canoodle with them. Harry had perhaps hamstrung his own efforts to coax Draco into something approaching companionship. Where he worried he might come on too strong and offered only a facsimile of friendship, Draco likely saw him making only the most base of efforts with no real intent behind it. He sat down on the couch as well, at the opposite end, enough they weren't touching. I'm not sure what I thought this was supposed to be like, personally. Getting married, I mean. I guess I always imagined I would. I wanted a family, after all, and I kind of assumed that was the quickest way to get one, if not the only way. But some very nice people over the years have helped me realize I didn't need to rush into anything I wasn't really ready for just to be part of a family. So I decided to press pause on that sort of thing. He shrugged. I mean, I never really knew my parents, and most of the marriages I've seen have been odd, kind of twisted, or at least not exactly something I saw myself in. He snorted softly to himself. Maybe it's kind of an asshole thing to say, but it strikes me as a little funny that you're the one who grew up seeing two people in a marriage you wanted for yourself, and I grew up hoping I never married someone like my guardians. He sighed and leaned back against the couch, staring ahead at nothing and letting his mind wander. He thought he could feel Draco watching him, but he didn't dare turn and look, for fear of ruining the moment. I always heard that your spouse was supposed to be your best friend, and that sounds all right to me. I'd like being married to someone I can have fun with. Someone I can mess with and who'll mess with me back. Someone I can just sit with. Someone I can fight with. Make up with. Harry nodded to himself. That sounds nice. Yeah. Though being someone's favourite person would be pretty swell too. And then he looked at Draco, and Draco was indeed looking at him. Even the influx couldn't help him figure out what Draco was feeling, though, so he just pressed on. I'm sorry for being myself, I guess. I get a bit myopic and feel like everything's my problem to fix. I know this whole thing hasn't exactly been a picnic for you for probably a dozen different reasons, and that you're having to deal with it all while I'm practically attached to you at the hip can only be making matters worse. But I promise, I'm genuinely just trying to figure you out. He bobbed his head. Seems kind of silly to go through all this and not come out understanding each other at least a little better. And then he sighed, finally accepting what Draco had been trying to tell him in every way he knew how. But I guess we really weren't meant to be friends after all. And truly, he didn't mean it poorly, it was just accepting what was. Draco didn't like this, didn't like any of it, and didn't wish to be reminded of it after all was said and done. Having even the barest semblance of friendship with Harry ran counter to that goal, and though it did not sit entirely well with him, Harry supposed he would have to accept that not everyone wanted to be saved, even if they needed it. Of course we weren't meant to be friends, Draco said, a bitter thing bitten out from his end of the couch, and Harry blinked, then narrowed his eyes, suspicion creeping in. But you did want to be. And this time Draco did not deny it, instead scoffing, I wanted a lot of stupid things as a child. Harry nodded. Maybe, but the great thing about being an adult, I've learned, is that you can actually give yourself permission to do all the things you weren't allowed as a child. Stay up late, eat junk food, swear, sleep till 4 in the afternoon. He cocked his head, raking Draco with an appraising look. No offense, but you don't strike me as the type who's ever allowed himself to make stupid decisions. Why on earth would I take offense at someone saying I've made good choices? I never said you made good choices, just that you probably didn't allow yourself to make stupid ones. At least not the harmless stupid ones. I think, though, that given your recent brush with death, you're allowed one or two stupid decisions. Having dodged death a few times myself, I feel I'm an authority on the matter. He reached for his papers again, dipping his quill in the inkwell. It's entirely up to you, though. In the meantime, I'm going to sit at this end of this very comfortable couch, which I want you to know I was very distressed to have learned just now was used by your parents to, God, I hope only, cuddle, though I won't let that put me off my meals, and do my very boring paperwork. And should you feel like being just a little bit stupid at any point in time, I promise not to judge you, nor will I tell another living soul. They can't make spouses testify against each other after all. He braced himself for Draco's sputtering huff, to be told for the 50th time to fuck off, to be saddled with another long, quiet evening alone. But instead he got, "Of course they only used it to cuddle. Good gad, why would you make me think otherwise? Fuck!" And with a shudder, Draco shoved himself into the farthest corner of the couch, drawing his legs up to his chest so as to touch as little of the cushion as possible, and went back to reading his presumably filthy dragon smut. And from that evening on, Harry took his dinner in his room and then promptly collected any work he might still have or any book he was working his way through or a pack of cards or wizard's chess set, and made his way down to the parlor where Draco would invariably also have set up shop. They wouldn't speak, not at first, or even nod or make eye contact, but eventually Harry would ask Draco how to spell paraphernalia, or miss an obvious move in his solo card or chess game, and Draco would be too tempted to lord himself over Harry that he'd be forced to interact. It went this way most nights until eventually Draco cut right to trouncing Harry the moment he saw an opening, at which point Harry decided he didn't wish to play cards or chess at all on second thought, and they went back to quietly reading on opposite ends of the couch. Shortly, though, one or the other decided he wanted to relax, and then it was all-out war to claim territory. Legs went in laps, toes wound up tucked under bums, really nothing was off limits, and there was even one time when Harry had seen how long it would take Draco to realize he was slowly but steadily scooting from his end of the couch over to Draco's, that Draco nodded off in the middle of a riveting chapter on differentiating healthy and sick dragons based on their scat, and ended up listing against Harry's shoulder. Harry froze up, not daring to make a move, and was left with no choice but to ignore the fact his left arm was going numb as he tried to focus on the crossword puzzle in the latest copy of the Quibbler. Luna had hinted he himself was the answer to one of the clues, but it turned out to be 16 across. In Beetle's Tales, the quality of a warlock's heart, Hairy. This close, he could catch the faint, clean, earthy scent of Draco's shampoo. How did he manage to wash all that hair? Maybe that was what he spent his days doing, and his book had fallen open in his lap. Harry leaned closer to get a peek. Draco had paused on a page of illustrations depicting common breeds from around the world. The Romanian longhorn was snorting a lungful of smoke at the Antipodean opali, charring its lovely pearly scales a filthy black, and the Chinese fireball was chasing its own tail. Harry idly wondered how Norberta was doing these days, and decided he'd send an owl to Charlie and check in. Draco exhaled softly, breath tickling Harry's collarbone, and Harry realized he hadn't been this close to Draco in any capacity since his birthday. There'd been no more fits, no more transformations, not so much as an upset stomach ever since the ritual nearly a month ago now, with any turmoil on Draco's end born entirely of his own overactive imagination and piss-poor personality. Not 2 months ago, Harry would have hexed you if you'd told him he'd shortly be sitting in Draco Malfoy's parlor, on Draco Malfoy's couch, wearing Draco Malfoy's wedding ring, practically canoodling with him, but all in all, it hadn't been the worst experience of Harry's life so far. In the grand scheme of things, marrying Draco Malfoy had been pretty darn easy. He hadn't even had a paperweight chucked at his head in weeks. If he'd had to choose between marrying Draco and subsisting on little more than mushroom-flavoured gruel while apparating around the British Isles for 3 months, Harry would have been hard-pressed not to go with the option that came with 3 square meals, his own neatly furnished room, and a note pit to keep him on his toes. Once this was all wrapped up, he might even miss crack. Harry nearly jumped out of his skin, shoving Draco away so fast he launched himself back toward his own end of the couch, heart in his throat. Draco blinked blearily at the commotion, limbs askew and hair in utter disarray. "Would the master and his oaf care for an evening toddy?" Old Byrne grunted, presenting a tray with 2 piping hot mugs atop it. Both too soon and not soon enough, the 30 days of virtual house arrest imposed by the consummation clause were up, and it was time for Harry to move back to Grimmauld Place. While he'd had just about enough of being cooped up in the still quite dreary Malfoy manor, not even allowed to explore the gardens or lands the family laid claim to, he was going to miss what had been his longest holiday in, well, forever, and was not looking forward to heading back into the ministry first thing Monday morning. Draco, predictably, went out of his way to be unavailable once Harry had packed up his little suitcase and finished tidying up his room, to old Burn's dismay. "Master's elf has ruined old Burn's afternoon. Now what shall he do with himself?" So the only person he could bid farewell to was old Burn himself, who just made a rude gesture and shuffled away, grumbling under his breath. Well, it had been nice while it lasted, in a few different respects. And with a note left behind slipped under the shut door of Draco's study that reminded him he'd be back once his schedule freed up so that they could close up the portal before it got out of hand, and to not let the imps get him down, Harry turned on his heel and was gone in a flash.